All right, off to a little bit of a slow start today, but we'll get links out there, and hopefully we'll get some folks to come join us. See a couple of you out there watching. You should come chat with us, because otherwise I'm just going to sit here and wave. And I'm sure you've got useful insight to provide into things. How's it going?
Pretty good. How about you?
It's going pretty awesome. Had an awesome week at PuppetConf, and apparently when I talk shit, people seem to actually care. So like, I put together a blog post this morning, kind of like lamenting the fact that so many people that are coders don't think they're coders, and like are afraid of the Ruby, and it makes me sad.
Yeah, I've run into that a few times myself. I read your post right after you posted it. I had a guy working for me when I was a tech lead at Uyala, who is now recovered from that. Um, Not my doing, but he did the same thing. I was on him for 6 months, saying, "Come on, man, you just take the course. Just I probably sent him like 5 different things and said, just check this out. Try this. Try this. We'll send you to Ruby training. We'll do this. We'll do this. We'll do this. Try all these different things." And it was just, man, I just like running Bash. And well, shell shock.
Yeah, exactly right. And it's been funny, like, and I almost wanted to elaborate on the whole Perl thing because for me, like, the Perl was the quintessential. Like, the number of
Mm,
people I've run into are like, oh yeah, you have this sysadmin that's like, oh, I'm not a coder, and then like you watch this like Perl invocation flow from their fingers, and you're like, how did you do that? You just like hit like 3 different languages because you're technically in Shell. You executed some Perl code, and oh, by the way, you really are a programmer because you actually understand the damn regex. Like,
yeah.
not gonna lie, this guy ain't a regex person. Like, I am always like, oh crap, anytime I
I,
need to use regexes.
yeah, I see that a lot too, and it's always weird to me because I consider Perl regexes to be one of the worst parts of Perl. As much as I love them, they are why Perl has the reputation it has. I mean, I wrote Perl pretty much full time for a decade, and I still don't know most of the regexes some of these people can write. It's amazing to me that they can do it because I can't read it.
Yeah, no kidding. In fact, actually, if you read my post, there's like a line in there that's like, well, and the best part is like a week later you can actually reread this stuff. It's crazy because Perl is so powerful, but the number of times I ran into like I don't even know how to explain it. Like the different like invocations of types in variables and things like, oh, you need to pass that by association and use this one squiggly mark versus this character. And yeah, like the other thing, to be fair, most of my Perl was written in context of the VMware Perl API thingy, which, from what I
Mhm.
understand, makes people's eyes bleed.
Hmm.
So,
I've looked at it a couple times and ran away screaming.
well, and that's like at the end of the day, my big thing is that's why I do this, right? Like the reason I know Ruby has absolutely nothing to do with I wanted to learn how to code. It had everything to do with I'm tired of invoking these commands over and over and over again and making mistakes. I'm just going to write something to do this and re-encapsulate it, and it worked, and it solved my problems, and that's why.
Yep.
Um, yeah, give me one second here. For the record, I suck at the whole like doing different things. Um,
Oh,
like
multitasking.
yes, multitasking is not a thing for me. Like my favorite is you'll watch people and they're like, as they're talking. Hell, I can't even like demonstrate it without like go like pausing. But they're able to have a conversation in one window in like a video chat, then have the conversation in the other chat and check their email all at the same time. Yeah, that's not me.
Yeah, our CTO at where I work, Jonathan Ellis, the um, Apache chair for Cassandra.
Okay.
He is one of the most amazing people I've ever seen do that because he'll be watching HipChat, writing Java like some crazy Paxos code or something like that, and he'll be having a conversation with the person next to him and on IRC and checking his damn email. I don't know how he does it. Like we're all still trying to figure it out. It's kind of nuts. I can't do that. I can do too much, but not that much.
Well, and I always give Jay Timmerman a hard time. like his ability to context switch from, you know, making clicky clicky with the community document, the community stuff, and like the blog posts, and then jumping right into technical documentation or like technical stuff. Like, oh my god, it's insane. He does both, and I absolutely have to set aside time to write a blog post. Like this morning, I woke up pondering it, and it was like, okay, well, I can go work on cookbooks, or I can go straight to Starbucks and actually sit down and write this thing because I think it's more valuable than the couple lines of code I'm going to crank out. So that's what I did.
Yeah, that's a really important topic in systems administration and DevOps, right?
Mhm.
There are legions and legions of sysadmins and DBAs out there that are so close to being able to basically 10x themselves.
Agreed.
Going from being somebody who can do neat things on the shell to being able to write Ruby or Python or whatever the heck it is that they want to use, that's easily a 10x of yourself, and that's a big goal I think that I have actually is every time I interact with groups publicly, I try to push that forward.
Agreed. And it's funny because like I know that there are people out there that basically are like, oh well, of course you joined Chef, of course you believe that, and you know those types of things. And it's not really like, if anything, you know what's been interesting about being at Chef is the reality of looking back at Puppet and going, wow, I was dumb for not spending some time learning how to do those things. Like, I mean, let's face it, I've written custom functions in Rage because haven't we all? That like if you started way back in the day, like I think we've all written custom functions in Rage. Granted, they're not pretty, but they're important. And types and providers are the same way. Like if I were to go back to a Puppet shop, I would absolutely spend a ton of time learning how to write good types and providers because you can abstract away so much bullshit and do neat things, right? Like I think one of the first things I would do if someone hasn't already written it is for a lot of these monitoring things, I would write some types and providers to interact with Pingdom, to interact with Opsmatic, and with what are the other ones right now? VictorOps and PagerDuty and all those things, because hey, it's in the code base, which means hey, it's trackable, which means hey, I can reason about it, instead of in other places. And then, not gonna lie, like I had a couple of conversations with people who are like, well, so really, what's the differences? And I'm like, okay, well, I code more, like I string manipulation, it's a thing, but as we're sitting talking, I almost always inevitably get that point of, well, I'm not a coder, I can't do that, and then I'm like, dude, go look at your templates, and I'm willing to bet we can find in your code base some ridiculously scary Ruby, because that's how we all fixed it, right? It's like, oh crap, I need to do this thing, but I can't do it in the manifest, so I'm gonna go break a template, and it works. And if that's what's keeping your shop running, hell yeah, like make that happen. Not the world I want to live in anymore, not gonna lie, but like totally, if that's gonna solve your problem, like do that thing.
Chris, the whole like doing string manipulation in Puppet. People keep talking about how your manifest and stuff are code, but the intent of the language is not to be a Turing complete thing. It's like it's an abstraction for the configuration. So it's incredibly useful and stuff to have loops and stuff in there, but it's turning into this full blown, like turning it into another Ruby is not. It's not something that the Puppet community should do.
Oh no, totally agreed. And I would argue that even when you're doing a lot of that stuff in Chef, you should be writing helper methods, which I think which translates directly into Puppet in my opinion anyway, of writing custom functions, like where you've got to do some of that crazy stuff. The problem is instead of writing those custom functions, a lot of times you see either it gets abused way down in the template and you don't actually see what's going on, or you see like an inline template to do that to make that to do that little bit of string manipulation. So, I mean, I'm totally with you. I think that that's actually one of the powers of Puppet is not having it be just a language. Or not be Ruby. Like it has its place. I would be remiss if I said that's a place I want to be, but it definitely does have its place, and I don't fault anyone for liking that. So,
but I think that if what the goal is to get more of these traditional sysadmins and DBAs, are the ones I think a lot about, are the ones I've worked with in the past. Maybe going all the way to saying, learn Chef, learn Puppet, learn CF Engine, Ansible, what's the other one?
Salt.
Whatever it is. Salt. Is I think that's part of why they're still stuck. Is these are I mean, some of the newer ones are a little bit less complex to get started with, but there's a lot of stuff you got to learn just to get started with these things. And I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile, but that's what holds a lot of these people up. And so a lot of times what I've tried, and I think it's worked a couple of times, is things like, hey, you know all those shell scripts that you got that you're using to manage your stuff? Let's just get it into a Git repo. Just get it into a Git repo. Let's start managing this code. Let's start refactoring it. Let's start breaking these things into even just shell functions sometimes, and start showing the power of modularizing your code into scripts, little libraries of functions and things like that, and then they start to get a little bit of that taste of the power of having modular code that they can reuse, and going, hey, you know what, I don't have to go and copy paste this big chunk of shell to all these different scripts. And we've all seen it, right? The 50 shell scripts that are all the same script with like 2 lines changed.
Seen it. I think I'm guilty of it.
Yeah, I mean, we all did it early in our careers, when, especially for those of us who didn't go to college or to CS degree and kind of learned programming on the fly. And so that's why I think, yeah, we should lead them forward into kind of the mainstream tools for configuration management, but sometimes you got to start a lot more primitive.
Oh, totally agreed. In fact, I think Stephen Morawski and I talked about this at some point on our podcast, Ops All the Things, like that idea of, yeah, like configuration management is a thing and it's awesome, but like, can we just start with the Gits? Like, just start version controlling your stuff. Like, because in fact, I had an old coworker when I was at my first sysadmin job, who, like, we always knew he had been in a directory because you'd have a bunch of double-lettered Perl scripts, like it'd be AA, BB, CC, JJ.
With a tilde at the end of the name, right?
No, that was the entire script name, right? Like, that was just the file. And you'd be like, what the hell is this thing? Come to find out, it's getting called from a cron job. And it's actually important. In fact, I think actually one of the reason we knew that it was in a cron job later on was one of my coworkers got pissed off and wrote something that went and removed a bunch of those files in one of the mail directories, or like the mail management code. Yeah, that wasn't so pretty. But anyway, I'm right there with you. Like, start small and then build your way up to the configuration management tools. But I think, for me anyway, I guess my post was kind of targeted at those folks that are Puppet, that are already writing Puppet, that are already writing Chef, that are already writing Ansible, that are in that environment. It's like, you're already doing it. Like, just don't be afraid of it. And I felt like such an old man when I was like, because I ended up sharing an Uber with someone on my way to SFO, and he's like, oh, well, most of our facts are they're just shell scripts. And I'm like, screw you, because I didn't have that ability. Well, no, like, it just wasn't a thing when I started. Like,
oh yeah.
You got to navigate your way through this little factors API/DSL. They're sort of the same thing, but not quite.
Well, and not gonna lie, I literally just found so like, I am king of copy pasta. I found a fact that was basic enough that all it did was return and thing. So that's what I copied, and then I pasted some Ruby code in, and it worked. And that was awesome. In fact, it's great. You can go back and see some of my old facts where, like, half of them have, like, half of the calls have curly braces and half of the calls have do end, because I didn't actually know the difference. I just know that that was how it was copy pasted, so it worked, and I smiled and moved on.
You know, that reminds me of a good something I've learned recently, because I work a lot more with developers now, because I'll go talk to them about Cassandra, and a lot of times it'll be a room full of Java developers, or sometimes Python. And you mentioned the copy pasta. We think that that's sometimes. I used to think that that was kind of sysadmins and DBAs, the people who kind of more often than not come out of a non-traditional background, not CS, learn to code that way. But what I'm seeing is a huge amount of proper coders, people who went to CS school, that's still what they do too. You know, I'm trying to show them how to use a database, and they're like, "Give me some code I can copy and paste into my IDE, and I'm happy to try it." And so I think it's important for the ops community to understand that it's not just us. You know, a good portion of the code we're deploying has been copy pasta as well, and it's not something we should be embarrassed of. I mean, maybe we should be, but sometimes if it's boilerplate, you should copy paste it. And especially when you're a beginner, you probably should sometimes use code that you know is good to start with until you understand all of the different things going on. Instead of getting really kind of giving yourself an anxiety attack over, oh my God, I don't understand curly braces and do end in Ruby, and I'm just not going to do this. I'm going to go use shell because I don't want to have to go spend time on this right now. Instead, just copy paste it, get it running, and fine tune it later.
Have you heard of the drive principles? Don't repeat yourself. So it's something that a lot of people don't really like. I'll explain this to them like, oh, that makes total sense. Why am I not doing that? And you just sort of repeat that. You know, you don't necessarily like the whole refactoring your code thing. To just, you know, you see two pieces of code that are identical except for like one thing. So you refactor that code and just, you know, reduce the technical debt over time.
Well, sometimes, right? The problem with I only have one problem with dry, and it's just one, and it's the same. This applies to everything, right? Some people go too far.
Yeah.
Because it's like the Go people talk a lot about this. Is you have two functions that are very similar, and yes, if they are very, very similar or the same, you should merge them and have only one copy because having two copies is silly. But there are times when leaving them independent gives you another advantage in terms of maybe you have two pieces of code that are in separate repos, and the cost of copying a 15-line function and maintaining that's not a big deal.
Yeah, this is like...
So that's all. I just wanted to add on to that because I run into a lot of people read about dry and go, especially sysadmins, because we love that stuff. We're like, yes, don't copy stuff around. Let's make it as small as possible, keep it simple, stupid, and take it a little bit too far. I know I've done it lots and lots and lots of times.
Yeah, the exception is not the rule, kind of thing. Like you still have to be intelligent about your overall design. It's just I've walked in on large Puppet deployments where I'm like, holy crap.
I'm right there with you. And so you guys actually are hitting on a point that's that's non-obvious, and it didn't click into...
And some Chef stuff that I've seen, like new users that are working with Chef. I've seen that before too, where it's like, I got this one thing to do like whatever, and instead of, the right way, they'll just copy and paste that over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, well, and that's the case with all, I think, programming. And in fact, and you almost hit on an implicit piece there, that if you listen to the Ruby Rogues podcast, you hear David Brady talk a lot about if you're coming from an language, you have this tendency to write the new language you're in the old language. So, like, for example, we see this, in fact, you really want to see this, go find some, like, really old chef cookbooks, and you'll find that they have Puppetisms in them. They look like Puppet code in a lot of ways because, frankly, that's where they came from. Like, they were originally written as Puppet code and translated across. And because I think that that's a better example than trying to explain, because I don't actually understand how you write C++ in Ruby, but that's something that has it happens, right? Like if you come from Java and you start writing Python, your Python is probably initially going to look a lot like Java because that's the world you came from. And it's not the end of the world, it's just the nature of things. But there's another implicit thing that I think we're missing, and I actually need to write a blog post about this because I think it's important, but it's all about vocabulary. Like, how many times have you walked over to the developers and talked to them and had that conversation, and it's like you walk away thinking, okay, so you develop on this system, but you have no idea that that thing is called this, or that all of those little mechanisms underneath. And my favorite will forever be the computer science student that refers to the timeshare box as the compiler. It's that are we having conversations in a way that makes sense? But on the flip side, we as operations folks are not learning their language, right? Like, if you walk into development shops and don't understand how how they converse and how they think about problem sets, it's hard. So one of the things I've been doing a lot, and when I talk with developers, is explaining the operational things in terms of their workflows, and it really starts to click. So when I was at Company -1, I was talking with one of the developers who was like, well, I don't understand why you can't just SSH into all these boxes and install this package. And I totally could, right? Like, I could totally just SSH 4x in hosts SSH or SSH yum install blah and be done with it. But
then you got to do it over and over and over again.
Well, so the way I explained it to them is, think about it this way. What you really just asked me to do is to go and go to the source code that's sitting on the box and manually add new code, update code that's sitting on the box in the production code base without checking it back into Git, or without checking it back into the source code repository. And as a result, they are like, oh, yeah, no, that's bad. Don't do that. The same goes with, well, I don't understand why you can't just, stop the service, make the change, and start it again. And I liken that to, oh, so basically you want me to open up a REPL to a running Rails application, monkey patch what's running in production right now, and then close out the REPL. There's no, now the entire application is going to behave differently, and oh, by the way, we have no record of any of that. And the problem is as sysadmins, I would bet a good portion of sysadmins have no idea what I just referred to when I said REPL, which is not a problem. But it's a thing, right? Or even what monkey patching actually is, outside of a really cool name for a really scary thing.
You don't work with any Erlang developer. Well, you do, but
yeah. Well, I mean, every sysadmin knows what a REPL is. That's our life. I mean, Bash is a REPL.
Well, redevelop print loop, but
but most
people. But that's what Bash and ZSH are, right?
I think he means the terminology is probably.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, it's really simple to explain. That's what they are. You have IPython, IRB, Scala Shell. Those are all. Once you get a few examples, I think most people pick it up pretty quickly.
Well, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is for the recording. Basically, you can, if you just go and type Ruby, you type Ruby or Perl or whatever, it just drops you into standard in, and then or Python or whatever, and then you just start typing commands, and it just as it evaluates each line. That's a REPL.
For the record, those of you that have the Rubies available to you, IRB is the easy way to do that.
I really liked in Ruby pry. Isn't that the other one?
Yeah.
The one thing I really liked about pry was when I was debugging. I haven't written Ruby in a while, but I could drop. There's a way you can drop pry into a specific anywhere in your program, and it's almost like a breakpoint, and you'll run up, and then it'll pop into a shell, and then you have all of the state basically just like a debugger, but you're sitting in a REPL, and you can dink around.
They're really
this
cool.
is what,
They're really cool.
that's really handy sometimes.
Yeah, the pry thing is very much like a shell, and that's the thing I love about it is the way you can navigate the objects with directories and file semantics. Usually, like sort of CD around into the inside the object.
I didn't know you could do that. I'm going to have to play with that.
Hunter, I think was it Hunter that wrote the Puppet Pry module?
Yeah, if you're using Puppet, check out Puppet-Pry because that'll let you drop down into Pry shell from inside your Puppet modules. Very fantastic.
Yeah, from inside of the manifest, which is awesome. It's like, what the fuck is this doing?
Wait a second. Wait, back up, just because I haven't seen this thing before. So wait a second. You're saying I can put a thing in my manifest, and it pops up a pry when it goes through and does a Puppet apply or does a Puppet run?
Yep.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That's handy, yeah.
That
would solve a lot of WTFs.
Instead of like if this fail, if this pry.
Yeah, that's in the Hangout chat. I don't know if that gets put up to YouTube or whatnot, but Forge PuppetLabs.com/Hunter HUNNER/pry.
Okay, so during this morning's tweets, I poked and prodded to come join us. Welcome, Robert. This is actually something I'd love because we've got a good group of people here. I'd love to hear some thoughts on. So, is there really a difference between a developer, a programmer, a coder? We talk about operations people. Like, where are there lines there? Does it actually matter? Like, I will be, and to start this conversation off, I don't identify as a developer. As much as I consider myself a software engineer, I don't consider myself a developer. I'm not someone that's going to go, like, build a Rails application and actually know what the heck I'm doing. But on the same token, I do feel like I'm a coder, I do feel like I'm a programmer, I do feel like I'm a software engineer where I'm like, yeah, I'm breaking things because that's what I do. So yeah. Someone jump in and tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
All right,
you get facts. Sorry about that.
I mean, I've gone through the complete cycle a couple times now. From I started as a sysadmin, dropped out of the music major in college, got a job as a sysadmin, learned Perl and Shell on the fly, and then gradually wrote a lot more Perl, learned object-oriented programming, started learning Python and a lot of other stuff. Have done a few jobs as a pure developer, and I think that most people think there's a bigger gap between being a good systems administrator in terms of programming and being an actual developer. And that's kind of the interesting part with a lot of the discussions over the last couple of years we've been having with DevOps is kind of closing that gap. There are things like getting better discipline about testing is more something we put in the developers camp, but that's something that now most people working with Chef and Puppet are starting to pick up on and starting to understand the importance of it. Mainly the things that change are things like, as a sysadmin, I did really well because it's very interrupt driven. A lot of people hate that part, and even I hate it a lot of times, but for some of us, we're just good at that. We're good at handling interrupts. And when you're doing development work, you have a sprint and you've got to deliver things in some kind of a deterministic timeline. Usually it's Scrum around the Bay Area anyway. But that's a bigger part of your job than handling firefighting, right? Is you need to be able to write, you have a 2-week goal, you need to be able to write code because you have other people waiting on you to get it done. That's a big shift. But the technical side, it's not actually that big of a shift. You should be learning things about different kinds of programming, functional programming, object-oriented programming, even if you're going to be a system administrator for your whole career, I think.
I wouldn't disagree with any of that. I think you're right on. And it's interesting, I've actually heard people describe the difference as from an operations mindset, you tend to be you are concerned with how does it break, and with a development mindset, you tend to be concerned with how does it get created. So just that difference in thought process. But Eric, I feel like you had something to say. but he may be frozen. So yeah. Any other thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I noticed when I was doing development full time was we talk a lot about, or you hear a lot about full stack developers, and when I was working with a lot of engineers that came from the other side, what I noticed is when we talked about things like interacting with the operating system or interacting with network services, they have a completely different view of how these things work than we do when we're working down closer to the metal. They're coming from the other side, and they think, oh yeah, you open a TCP socket and everything works because TCP is reliable, right? Or hey, just shell out to put together this command string and do the greater than thing right to a log file, and that's cool, right?
Well, sure.
And then I would say that coming from the other side, dinking around with shells and understanding how this works at the very low level in the process, the way the processors respond, they go, why do you care about this stuff? And I'd say, well, you got to understand the overhead that you're putting on the system when you're doing this. When you're executing sh-c to parse command strings, that's just an extra hop you're adding in, and it adds confusion, it adds system load, different things like that. I'm not sure I'm getting it across, but there's a completely different perspective in how operating systems and hardware and networking work that I think ops people have deep knowledge on.
Conversely, though, I mean, as people advance in their careers and as you gain knowledge, I would say that the two sides of things converge, and indeed, the people who are best at both sides of the discipline are the people that have an understanding of the proverbial full stack, but actually really the full stack all the way down into how the CPU orders instructions, if you want to care about that sort of stuff. I mean, the developers that I've worked with in the past as a systems administrator who impressed me the most were the people who exhibited knowledge of the way Unix worked at a level that I didn't understand as a systems administrator, right? That they were like, well, here, let me show you how the process scheduling actually works, because they could open up that. It's all code, right? All the way down. It's all code, even down into the microarchitecture of the way the CPU works. And conversely, the people who were started out in systems administration and do a really great job at running particularly large-scale distributed systems that are sort of the way the world's going, are the people who understand how the code how the application software works and how the interactions in between the operating system and the application, like where those interfaces are prone to failure, from both sides of the stack.
Yeah. So I think it's an interesting thing. So for me, I feel like while I at this point in my life do write code on a semi-regular basis, mostly just kind of hacking on dashboards or hacking on like, okay, how do I do this thing? I don't sit and write application code very often, like large-scale application code, but I read the heck out of it. The number of times where there's been a large site outage and I was one of the people that pointed out, oh, hey, well, it makes this function call to MySQL in this thing that gets invoked by everything, and I happen to know the way TCP works, which means that that's just going to hang because the box is down. Those things become the ability to read the code. It's really interesting. As I said, I can't write a whole lot of it. Like to jump into a large-scale PHP app and write anything of use is not high. But my ability to go look at large-scale PHP applications and be able to debug them when they go sideways, that's something I have gotten good at. And I wonder if when we use the term developer, we are implicitly saying you are good at writing those things, and a lot of us are more focused on I can read it, but I can't really write it, so I don't feel like I can be called developer because I'm not fluent.
I think that's certainly true. When I started here at Puppet, one of the first things that I did was quite naively, I was like, hey, well, now I work and I have commit access, so maybe I actually can fix some of the stuff that's been bugging me for the last 3 years. And the first couple of pull requests I put in, the actual developers on the core team were like, dude, don't do that anymore. Just follow the bugs. I mean, there's this whole ecosystem around not just the immediate framework that needs to go along with it, how that fits into the larger application architecture, and like what kind of the right solution is overall. That I think is one of those is one of those things that distinguishes a professional developer from somebody who can whack on code. Just like from the sysadmin side, having an awareness of how you can't just write something up and throw it into production. You need to have monitoring laid out. You need to have your logging subsystems laid out, and you need to have the system tuning stuff worked out. It's maybe the larger context in which the two sides work that really distinguishes the specialists in one from the other.
There's a definite distinct difference between software development and software engineering, and it's been a complaint in a lot of computer science courses, or at least like the products of computer science courses. I think that at UBC they started trying to address this. They're actually teaching. You'll go through learning CS fundamentals and various things, but then you'll also at some point they'll actually make you start doing real software work. Like you're not writing like little toy things. You're helping Intel, do trace analysis on their CPUs and stuff like that, like major distributed computing projects. Same thing with systems architecture and system architecture and software development. It's not like a requirement to pass, so it never gets taught, and you end up with people that, or what's the thread, or stuff like that. Mm-hmm. William Richard Stevens wrote some good books in the 90s on Unix programming, which are still relevant to this day. If you haven't read them, especially if you're doing like a lot of TCP socket programming and stuff like that, you should probably go review them. I think some of them have been updated by different authors since his death. So.
Okay, so Robert, can you try and give a shout into your mic? Let's see if it works.
Sure. Is this doing any better?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent. And yes, I have a hardware switch on the headset, but it was apparently still having issues. So thanks for dragging me into this. The thing that I've thought, I taught myself to program 25 years ago because I was bored, and since then I've tried to avoid it like the plague. And one of the things that I really take seriously is that if I'm going to call myself a coder or a developer or a programmer, then that's me saying I expect to be held to a certain level. When somebody hears that, they should expect certain things from me, and in most cases, I'm not quite at that point. So, as was said earlier, I can read a script and figure out what it's doing. I can tweak Perl. I can tweak some other languages. But in terms of starting from the ground up and building something in software, definitely not my strong suit. And
and you're hitting on that point, right? Like at the end of the day, like what do things even mean, right? Like we sadly as an industry, what is the difference between a software developer, a software engineer, and a software ninja? Because Lord knows we've seen those on people's business cards. And on the flip side of that, what's the difference between a senior, a junior, a non, doesn't have something pre-pending it? Like, I mean, let's face it, at least 2 recruiters that in my memory have actually sent me emails saying they'd like to interview me for a senior Ruby development position based on my GitHub. needless to say, I don't respond to those because I don't know that I'd want to work at a company where they thought I was a senior. But you get that idea, right? Like, I think we need to have more of these conversations, and I don't think we're having them. Mainly because we just have so many other broken things, right? Like, this is important, and it's something that we need to be doing, but, like, we've got so many other things to fix that aren't the nomenclature. It's like organizations I walk into, and they're like, we're handling governance, and it's like, but you can't even ship code. Like, why are you trying to governate when you don't even have... and that's particularly fitting because I'm thinking of places that are involved with the state of California. But, like, really, learn how to ship code first, and then we'll talk. Like, governance isn't a thing yet.
Yeah.
To address what Robert was saying earlier, though, I think a lot of people are... You were talking about the expectations people have if you say, I'm going to write some software for you. I know I wasted a lot of time in life worrying about all the things that I have to do to be a real software developer. Am I going to be a real boy now? And it really is. I think you just have to write some damn software to even before you even know what you don't know. And what I think we've been talking about here is we want more and more of our peers to start actually getting out and writing some code, and whether that's as part of something that's going to go to production, or if it's maybe a small dashboard for looking into their monitoring system. What I would like to see from in more of especially the sysadmin communities is people doing that and just saying forget it, it's going to suck, let it suck, it's going to be terrible, you're going to throw it away, but you have to do it or you will never learn these things that you need to know to be good at it. Right? So that's why I think when we talk about to be a real software developer, you have to be good at testing and Scrum and time management and all these things. Yes, I agree, you should be good at those things, but when you're a beginner, those are not the things you should be worrying about right away.
Well, and I mean, at the end of the day, when we talk about operations professionals, like, I'm willing to bet that we could probably get a group of people that we deem, that we would say are luminaries in our field of operations, and realize that, holy crap, there are a few underlying themes, but at the end of the day, like, a lot of their skill sets are really, really different. But on the note of operations, I kind of want to take a moment, because so the secret's out. I'm not actually in operations these days, which is kind of nice.
Me neither.
I'm actually a community person, which may or may not mean I have the ability to expense some beer. But this week has been a holy crap moment for a lot of operations people. How many people are handling, like, the shell shock stuff right now? And is it going all right outside of the fact that, like, oh, just kidding, it's not the actual patch, here, have another one?
Patch is being right. It's not that big of a deal. We don't have anything that's affected by it. Miracles of Erlang and Java, and not shelling out code and actually having proper security reviews during your development process and stuff like that. But I mean, if you are operating at any sort of size beyond one server and you don't have the ability to, command and control a singular package update across your fleet, then what are you doing?
Yeah. I think that a lot of us are kind of, and that's kind of yay DevOps echo chamber, right? Although, I've been watching some other chats that are with groups that aren't always, what is it called? That don't have the configuration management stuff, don't have the command and control stuff, but even they tend to have, even if it's just bash in a for loop, right? Like, go talk to all the boxes and, run apt-get. Or, I'm sorry, generally if you're running that way, you probably are doing a yum install or a yum update. Or if you're in Solaris,
We're sorry. We're so sorry.
Well, but if you're on Solaris, most of these problems, unless you explicitly use Bash, well, if it's classic Solaris, your POSIX shell isn't Bash. Well, it is on Open Solaris, but on Solaris, I don't. Solaris 10, Solaris 11.
no,
I don't think.
It's probably your root shell is probably not Bash, but you probably have something running Bash because that was kind of a common thing, Solaris 10 plus. But yeah,
Well,
I guess
the big problem I've been digging into, and actually I was working on. I'm going to put a video on YouTube a little later about it. Is showing how even in Python, Perl, and Ruby, if you just use system directly, it calls sh-c, which on most people's systems is a symlink to bin bash. And if the environment passes through those, say from CGI or you're using it for some kind of an SSH wrapper, then it's exploitable. And that's what a lot of people that's one thing I think a lot of people are still just starting to pick up on is it's not just bash. It's anything that ends up calling bash.
Yeah, someone's got an alarm in the back. There's like people when it came out, it's like, oh, Bash, and then I thought in my head, what uses Bash? Everything. Okay, and how can I get the CGIs? It's like the F5 thing. The F5 load balancer. If your authenticated users can, because it ends up running as a root for their like internal daemons, you can go retrieve the shadow file. And like this isn't normally a problem, but let's say you're a customer of Rackspace. They actually no, they don't let you onto those.
well,
One of the vendors I used in the past, they gave me shared access to an F5, but I could actually go in and like fiddle with the settings.
I think that yeah. So I'm right there with a lot of people because a lot of the responses I've gotten are, well, if we're at this point, like it's a bigger problem before we get there to where it's exploitable. But yeah, it's frustrating. I'm looking forward to this getting patched because oh my god. But continuing on with the joy that has been this week, how many people are dealing with, or what are we calling it, Reboot Gate? I'm sure there is a name for the fact that if you're on the Amazons, you're being forced to reboot a lot of things.
It's not even that you have to reboot it; it's just that it's being rebooted for you. And we have a lot of stuff on Amazon, and they're being nice about it. That they're not rebooting like all of US West 1 at the same point. They're rebooting the AZs.
Mm-hmm.
But I pulled up the calendar, and one of them's at like 11 p.m. on Saturday, and the one for that same AZ or for the same region in the next AZ for us is at 5 a.m. And I was just like, oh, I'm not sleeping this weekend.
Yeah, and the major difference with this one versus almost every other scheduled maintenance for AWS is there's nothing you can do ahead of time. You can try, but the probability of you stopping and restarting your instance and getting a patched host is relatively small. When everything sort of came down, we had about 20% of our nodes that were going to be rebooted. I've got that down to about 10%, but I really can't wiggle it any further. That's just by using the script we have for stopping an instance or removing an instance from load balancer, stopping it, starting it, putting it back in. So normally we mitigate these scheduled maintenances, on our own time, and this is just going to be whenever AWS decides to come at it.
Well, and I've heard that some people
for everybody.
Exactly right. Well, and I saw a couple operations professionals kind of complaining about the instability of things, and it's like, well, I don't know. In some ways this is a positive, in some ways this is a huge negative. Like, I'm not happy about it. Like, I wish we had more control over the ability to do it. And I am seeing some people that the maintenance window is going away if you reboot the, if you like stop and start the instance.
Yeah, and that works sometimes. It's not a sure thing. Out of all of the nodes that were originally, or instances that were originally scheduled, we were able to get away with that on on some of them. We'll probably do another.
I mean, this is one of those places where operations and development interaction really can save a lot of pain, right? If you've been involved, and I did a lot of this when I was at Uyala, and the operations team there was very active in pushing developers to make sure they did the right things in terms of when we deploy code, you deploy it across AZs. We'd verify that it was deployed across AZs, and we wouldn't even let people deploy stuff in a single AZ. So that, if these reboots came along, and I'm pretty sure even today that they're probably just fine looking at it and going, okay, well, we'll just let them reboot. We got to put some care around our database instances, but other than that, all the web server stuff, just let it fly. Because, we had that strong interaction where operations was out in the teams saying, guys, everybody, these have to be spread across all the AZs, and actually now it's all across multiple data centers, and that's something that really needs to be driven by ops people because that's our domain expertise.
Yeah, and that's already been handled in this situation, but an unmanaged reboot is different than one that's managed. There are failovers, things have to be retry, things have to converge. So it's the difference between dropping no requests and dropping some number of requests, right?
Well, and at the end of the day, I think this just turns into a game day that was forced on you, and it sucks, and I wish we could do more about it. So to those of you that are stuck dealing with it, hats off to you. What I'm looking forward to is actually hearing what the heck this bug was, because the fact that it's an embargoed bug tells me it's going to be bad.
Oh, it's probably something along the lines of data leaking between processes or stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, I feel bad for AWS people, and I'm pretty mad, but I feel even worse for people who have their own, hosted Zen instances in the next coming week.
Yeah, right. Like is the patch publicly available? I don't think it's. I think there's just a, hey, it's broken. By the way, the largest set of Zen instances in the world, they're going to force you to reboot because once this goes live, they don't have any other option. Which is probably positive. I mean, to be fair, the alternative to this situation is this could get made public before Amazon had a chance to patch for it, and then we'd all be screwed.
Well, and Amazon's the only big public, or maybe Rackspace public cloud that's using Zen on the back end, right? GCE is using KVM, and that's where you have the trouble, right? That's where you have untrusted code. If you have a private cloud, you're running OpenStack or CloudStack with Zen, it's going to be something you're going to have to fix, but it's not going to be, oh my God, drop on my weekend plans. That's where I think people get excited with a lot of security releases. If this Zen thing comes out, and sure, if somebody has root access on a VM, they can inject a blue pill or crash other VMs on the system. That's really bad, but if you know what all the code is running on the hypervisor, it's not the end of the world. It's something you should fix, but you don't have to drop everything to do it, right? Whereas
Exactly.
Shell Shock is the other side, where it's, holy shit, everybody in the world has something that's exposed, that's vulnerable. We got to get this fixed.
Exactly. And on that note, folks, it is noon. I know we got off to a late start. Thank you for joining us. It was a blast. And I will be at Chef Summit next week, so my goal is to stand up an open space and do the HangOps thing at Chef Community Summit. So come join us. And actually, we'd love to see you there in person. So
Where is it?
Hopefully you'll be in Seattle.
Seattle.
Yes, we're in Seattle. There's drinks on the 1st, and then I think we've got 2 days of open space and awesomeness the 2nd and 3rd.
Cool.
So, thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone, and a great week.
All right.